Hello everyone, and welcome to our first video that we have for our programming section. Now, in this video we're going to be covering what's called a hello world. A hello world is typically the first video that is always created when you're getting into programming. It's the very first one, it's introduction. I'll be covering a hello world as well as every other resource that you find online. Your first program that you're going to do is a hello world program. So some things that we need to know before we can properly execute a hello world program would be some things like a scope and a library and some comments. So we're going to touch on all of those in this video. So first is a scope. So the scope of an item is alive only within its specific curly braces that it was created in. When a curly brace ends, which looks like this, a closing curly brace, then all the items within that scope are destroyed. So what that would mean is this is the beginning of the scope, an open curly brace. Everything that we create inside of these curly braces exists in the curly braces, and we can use them inside these curly braces. The moment that this closes here, now everything that we have within these curly braces are destroyed. So person 1 is created here. Person 1 can be used very easily within this scope. Then the moment that we close this curly brace, we no longer have access to the object that we created, or anything within that scope that we previously had. This will make a lot of sense when we get into programming. It's very easy to understand. So if it's confusing right now, when we get into the coding portion at the end of the video, it'll be very easy. Next is called a library. So libraries, as a matter of fact, I have never written a single program, I can't think of one, that I've never not used a library. It has been required in every single program I've ever written. The library that we will be utilizing in just about we will use it in every single video, especially in all the one series videos, we will always be using include IOStream. So this library is going to go and grab all the functionality and features that's included in the IOStream library. So you can think of this as a bunch of additional code that our program has that we aren't looking at right now. So when we go and compile this code, all of these additional features that are nested inside of this IOStream library are all going to be added to the top portion of our program, and then that's sent to be compiled and the machine reads it. So it's a bunch of additional features and functionality that we aren't looking at, but we know it's there. That's what a library is. These other libraries are examples. This is an IO manip library. This is maybe if you wanted to do specific widths on spacing or some things like that. The fstream library is used for file reading, so file reading and file writing is used for the fstream. Again, a library is going to be used in every single program that we write. And so now this is what our hello world looks like. So again, this is the first project that every programmer starts off with, and we're going to be doing it here in C++, of course. Now, this thing that we have here in green, these are called comments. And the way that we know it's comments is there's 2 backslashes in the beginning. So // means that everything written after these 2 backslashes here will not be read by the compiler. It will be completely skipped. So everything that I'm going to write in comments is all meant to be written by the programmer for the reader. So some things like this code may be a little bit tough to understand, so I put comments above what I'm writing, so that way the individual that's reading this, or if I have a very large project and I'm doing just a portion of it and I need to hand it off to someone else, it can get very tough sometimes to read someone else's code. So you want to add as many comments as you can, so that way it's very easy to pick up. So we're going to go through and add comments for everything here that we have in our hello world. So of course we have our hello world, we have our comments, and then we see that we're using a library. We're using the IOStream library, and again, we will be utilizing the IOStream library for every single program that we write for the entirety of this YouTube channel. So now we're starting it off. Now this is going to be our entire program that we have, and we're going to add some things at the end, but this is all the basics you need for a hello world program. So let's walk through everything. So again, this is our library. It holds all the code utilized for the input-output. Specifically in this portion, we are just going to be utilizing the output feature. That's our cout call here. The cout is console output. So that's utilized the output, which is needed by the IOStream library. Next, we have the Int Main. This is how every C++ project starts. It starts with the Int Main. This is where it knows to begin reading. So everything before Int Main, I don't want to confuse you guys and say that it's not where it starts, but it's all just additional information. So when the compiler is reading it, the first thing it's going to do is it's going to start with its Int Main portion, and then the first line of code after Int Main is where it starts. So it's going to start here and then start reading the lines of code left to right, top to bottom. We'll get into more details later on what can come before an Int Main, but that's all you need to worry about right now. So when you write a program, what you're going to write is your pound include iostream, int main with an open parenthesis, close parenthesis, and then you need a curly brace here and an ending curly brace. Those are all the requirements you need for a blank document for coding. Next, our first line of code that we actually have within our int main is our std : cout. So what that means is this is the standard. So std, we're going to eventually get rid of this, but I initially want to show you guys what it looks like when we are using the std : but this is the cout, the console output is what cout means. So the console output is going to output hello world. This is how you print for the user to see. Next is going to be this is the less than operator. So two less than operators together create what's called an insertion operator. This is used to insert an object into, or insert an item into the console output. So we are going to be console outputting hello world, and we have to do that with an open quote and an end quote, into our cout statement. When we use the insertion operator again, now we're inserting the end line function. This is an end L. So and that stands for end line. So now this is our end line function. So if we were to write something else after this, it's going to print on the following line below it. It's not going to print directly after the D in hello world. This is using end line. There are more details to come. It does some other small things, but I don't want to talk about what it does, but that's what's important. And then lastly, we see that there is a semicolon here. A semicolon is how you end your lines of code in C++. So we have cout, insertion operator, our quote, hello world. We end our quote. We do another insertion operator with our end line and then a semicolon. I could, if I wanted to, just put a semicolon at the end of this quote here. That would still, it wouldn't ruin it at all. It would still say hello world, but the very next line of code, if there was anything, would come directly after the D in hello world instead of pushing itself to the new line. Next, we have, this is our return value. I don't want to confuse you guys too much with what the return value does. We'll get into a lot more details of it at a later video. But for now, I want you guys to just write it. Again, we will get more details to it later, but for now, just write it, and you want to return 0. And it's really tough for me to explain why without giving you too much of a background. But the idea is it's going to return the value of 0. And you can write whatever you want. You could return any number. Return 1, return 5, return 50, return 1,000,000. Anything that you want to put here, but return 0 is the standard. Now what that means is it's returning the value of 0 back to the integer. And I know that that sounds really confusing and you have no idea what I'm talking about yet. We'll get there. It'll make a little bit more sense in the next video when we start talking about what an integer is. But for now, just take it as a rule, and you're going to want to write return 0 at the end. Now, depending on what compiler you're using, like what machine you're specifically running this on, you don't necessarily have to put the return 0 statement, but some compilers absolutely require it. So, for instance, my computer doesn't require me to write return 0, but I've done coding on some school computers, and those computers and those compilers absolutely required a return 0. And I sat on a bug that I couldn't figure out, and the reason was I didn't put return 0 at the end, and I didn't think I needed to because my computer or my compiler never needed it to, but the ones at school did. And another thing is it also, this is called the return value. When you run a program, and I'll show you what the return value is, when you run a program and at the end of the program we see return 0, that tells us that we made it all the way to the bottom of the program and it successfully executed every line of code without any bugs and it returned the value of 0. If you don't see the return value of 0 at the end, then that tells you that maybe there was a mistake or something didn't get executed properly. Now we have this last curly brace here. This last curly brace closes our int main portion. So again, everything within this open curly brace and close curly brace, that's all our scope. Once we reach this last curly brace, everything in here is destroyed. So it comes through line by line and it executes everything. So once it reaches this cout statement, cout hello world, it's going to display that. It's then going to go to the next line. It's going to return the value of 0. It's then going to go to this line and destroy everything. Now I know you guys are thinking that it's not going to print everything out because it destroyed it, but actually it already did print it. Once it gets to this line, it executes this line before it goes to the next line. And then it executes this line, and then once it reaches this line, all previous lines have already been executed. So now we close our curly brace and everything is destroyed. And you could think about that as it's saving space. Okay, now this is where we just got rid of the std::, in front of our cout statement. We used to write std::, cout. Now, I have never used the std::. Some people do like to use it, and the reason is it saves more space in your file. So when you compile it and run it, your file is just a little bit smaller. That's not something that I'm too worried about. So I always use what's called using namespace standard. Now this has a lot of additional functionality to it. You do not need to worry about it. The only thing that you need to understand about the using namespace standard is it makes it so you do not have to put std::, in front of the cout statement. So I highly prefer that you use the using namespace standard. I use it. I highly recommend it. And that makes it so your std::, is not needed. So this would be our program. So we have our library, so include IOStream, our using namespace standard with a colon, int main, open curly brace, open parentheses, close parentheses, then we have an open curly brace, and then we have our statement, which is a cout statement. So cout, insertion operator, open quote, hello world, close quote, insertion operator, end line, semicolon. Then you go to the next line, and you do your return 0. That way our return value is satisfied to integer. And then we close our curly brace. And if we were to build this and run this, we're going to get displayed hello world. So I added a little bit more lines. This is what we saw in our first video. This was the snippet of code that we had. And of course, this is everything that we're already familiar with. The only thing we added was another cout statement. So cout, insertion operator, open quote, USMC is greater than the US Army, close, and the insertion operator, end L. And this would be how it displays. Now if I wanted to do the same thing, but the only difference between this code here and this new code is that this original line, I use the insertion operator and the end L. In this next line of code that I use, I just go straight to hello world and I do a semicolon. I am not using the end line function. Now what that means is it's going to cout, so it's going to print hello world, and then it's going to print USMC is greater than US Army. Because I did not do an end line here, or the end line here doesn't matter, but because I didn't do my end line right here, what that means is there's no space, there's no new line feature. So the USMC prints directly after the D in hello world. So now we're going to actually get into the coding. And of course, the way I want to end every PowerPoint is just with our resources. So if anyone needs any help, these are our resources. I highly recommend you utilize these. I'll put them in the description so you guys can view them that way as well. Now we're going to get into our coding. So let's open up our Eclipse. And I used a little bit different of an Eclipse because I wanted to change the colors. I didn't like the dark mode, and I tried to change it, and it wouldn't let me, so I downloaded a different Eclipse to allow me, a different version of Eclipse to allow me to utilize it. So let's create a C++ project. We're going to call this Hello World. This is video 1.1. Hello World. and I want to use the Mac. And then I'm going to create a source file, so I two-finger click, new source file, and I'll just call this hello world. Hello world. And you can't have any spaces in this because this is our file name, .cpp. Now we just created a C++ file, and it is empty. So the first thing I want to do is I want to add my libraries. The next thing I want to do is add namespace standard. And of course, these are all just comments, right? I'm not coding anything. I want to go line by line on explaining comments. So add the int main portion. Then after that, I want to print hello world. Then I want to print Marine Corps is better than the Army and all other branches. That's a given. And we want to return 0. So these are all the things that I want to do for this project. These are all my comments. And one by one, we're going to go through and add everything. So inside my add library, I need to do my pound include, which is how I'm going to include my library. And I want to do the less than operator. And I want to do IOStream. So I want to include IOStream. For now, I'm not going to do the namespace standard. We'll come back to this after we run it a few times. So I want to get right into my int main. So the way I create my int main is int main open parentheses, close parentheses. Now I want to do my curly brace. So open curly brace, enter, and it's going to auto create a closed curly brace for me. So that's kind of neat. And now let's copy all of this and let's put it inside of here. So print hello world. The way we print hello world is we do std : cout because I'm not using the namespace standard. Insertion operator, hello world, close it, and then let's just close it there. We don't need to do our end line because right now everything is all going to be on the same line. And then we'll print more at the end, and then next I want to do my return 0. So return 0 semicolon. So something to note. So far I did not have to put a semicolon at the end of my int main line. This did not require a semicolon. All lines that end with a curly brace like this, you don't need to put a semicolon at. Also, libraries do not need a semicolon. So libraries are treated a little bit differently, and then anything with our open curly brace, that's also treated a little bit differently. But any lines of code, such as you can think of it as your logic code, those all require a semicolon. That may be a little confusing right now, but it'll make a lot more sense. So let's save it. Let's build it. And let's run it. Hello world, and it printed fine. Yeah, now it got rid of my error. Cool. So it printed hello world, and now our return 0. We see right here that our exit value here is displayed as the value of 0. So that tells us that this executed everything. It made it all the way to the bottom line, and it returned the value of 0. We see that here. So if I want to return the value of 3, and then we save, build, play, hello world, and now my exit value is 3. So this is a way that you can use, and it doesn't make a lot of sense with such a simple program, but when you have a heftier program and you're trying to figure out where your bugs are, you can do return statements with different values so you know where it ended at or if it made it to a certain position. You can also use print statements to see if it made it to certain locations, but this is just like a little tool that you can utilize. So we always want to use return 0. That's going to be our standard. And now let's come over here and let's do the end line. So we want to do the insertion operator, end line. And let's see what happens. Let's see if it's going to let us do an end line without any issues. So there is a mistake. And the mistake is that the end line feature also requires the std : So we want to come back over here. Oh, sorry, I didn't copy it, so we'll just type it. std : endl. Play. So hello world, and I know that you can't see that it created a new line, but it did. It pushed it so it's down here. It would be the next line to print something, and our exit value is 0. So now let's do more coding, or let's add another line. So we want to copy, go up, and then we'll paste it. Oh, we need std. So std cout, and then let's write something. Let's write the Marines is much better than your branch. Save it. We'll build it, and then we will play it. Awesome. Hello world, the Marines is much better than your branch. And of course, after our hello world is a new line. And the last thing I want to do is I want to get rid of these std colons because it's like a pet peeve of mine. I really don't like seeing those in my programs. I don't know what it is. I just don't enjoy it. So I always use using namespace standard. Using namespace standard, and this time you do have to add a colon. Now we can go through and we can get rid of all of our std colons. And now we're going to run it. We're going to save it. We're going to build it. And then we're going to run it. And everything still works the same. By utilizing the using namespace standard, we can now just write cout and endl. There are a couple other things that the using namespace standard is attached to, but this is the big one. So I hope that this made a little bit of sense with our hello world. I understand I kind of threw a lot of things at you, and I also pretty much just said like it's a rule and that's how it is to a couple things. It can be confusing in the beginning, but all of those things will come back full circle. So bear with us in the beginning. Things will start to make a lot more sense when we get to the later videos. So I'll see you guys in the next video, which is going to be about our primitive types.